Hello. It is indeed showtime. My name is Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I welcome to this particular broadcast. Welcome to my channel. I am a tippling philosopher. That is my blog name, as was, and how I still know myself on YouTube, and the sort of name associated with my column at Only Sky. And I'll be referring to one of my pieces there a little bit later. Why am I speaking to you at the last minute now, today? I'm speaking to you at the last minute now, today, when I hadn't expected to, because SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States in America, has just, well, actually, they haven't. There's been a leak that has alerted the rest of the country to the fact that they are due to make a vote on essentially repealing Roe v. Wade, this piece of sort of legal precedence from sort of 5 decades ago that protected, pro-choice, protected abortion in the United States at a national level, and that looks to be repealed due to the fact that the Supreme Court is overwhelmingly conservative at the moment, and it will be repealed. And that should mean that the decisions for whether abortion is legal or not will not be made at a national level, but at state level, which means it's even more important to get to vote in the senator that will protect those reproductive rights if that is important to you, and it should be important, I would argue. Now, this won't be so much about politics. This is going to be about philosophy. But I will start with a little bit of politics, which is to say that I've long maintained that voting for the president in the US and even senators in the US is essentially about voting for the Supreme Court justice nomination. That's really what you're doing. And America's full of single issue voters. So it means that I'm going to vote on gun rights, and I'm going to vote on abortion rights or freedom of religion, whatever. These single issues are what drives me as a human being, and my whole identity is wrapped up in those single issues. And as such, I will vote on the party that is going to maintain or do something with that single issue, to the point where that same party might make my life worse, might introduce legislation that changes welfare for me, or worsens education, or makes my life worse in really tangible matters. But because of this one issue that I give so much primacy to, they are big on that, I will vote for them on that. And so this is what happens in America. And so people vote on these single issues generally. And it all gets rather divisive. Now, what happens when you vote in a president and you have a Senate to back this up? Then really what you're voting in is the ability for the president to nominate a Supreme Court justice. And in America, you have a number of Supreme Court justices that make the law, essentially, or give legal precedence with big cases. And as a result, and morning, hello everyone in the live chat. And as a result, you can change the way that the country operates or the law is interpreted, because this is about interpreting the Constitution in any given way and creating law on account of that. So what's happened is Trump was supremely successful, supremely being a good choice of word, supremely successful as a president as far as the Conservatives are concerned, because he managed to get in three Supreme Court justices in his single term. I mean, that's incredible. And it was hugely controversial because Obama was due to put one in for 8 months and was not allowed to because he didn't hold, the Democrats didn't hold the Senate or the House at the time. And as a result, 8 months went by where he couldn't put in his liberal Supreme Court justice. And Trump came in, and then he managed to put in 3. And that changed the flavor of the Supreme Court to be overtly conservative. And when Justice Barrett was put in, she was asked, "Is Roe versus Wade, Roe v. Wade, is that a concrete precedent?" And she was like, "Nah, not really." So it's looking like that's going to go, which means that the whole of America is going to be in a very different place for the next few weeks and months than it was yesterday. Like, this has just come out of the blue. This is a leak that it has huge ramifications. America's going to be forgetting Ukraine for a bit, I can tell you. This is it has huge ramifications. And what will be front and center will be the debate about abortion. And the debate about abortion is generally, although not always, I mean, there's natural law involved in here, especially with some conservative, Catholic-leaning Supreme Court judges who will see what's called essentialism, that humans have certain essences and, et cetera, and that defines how they see the law interpreted through their lenses of something called natural law, very much a Catholic thing. I want to talk to you today about personhood to some degree, but also almost the antithesis of natural law, that humans have essences, that we all have these essential characteristics. That a man has manness, and a woman has womanness, and a human has humanness. And what is human being? What's the difference between human being, human, and a human? We're going to talk a bit about that in a little while. I am going to advocate to you something I have done in several videos before. This should not come as a surprise, but I am what's called a conceptual nominalist. And this is hugely, hugely important. And in fact, once you understand the building bricks down here, then everything up here, like abortion law or whatever, makes more sense or makes no sense. These things depend upon what is at the bottom of your brick wall. This is why I keep referring to this book. This is the book of mine, and this is on offer on Amazon UK paperback at the moment, really cheap on Amazon paperback. So if you're in the UK, grab this. In the US, grab it anyway. Anywhere else in the world, grab it. So this is going to be talking about ideas down here that will inform stuff up here. And this is hugely important. I'm going to talk to you about conceptual nominalism. Broadly speaking, conceptual nominalism is the idea that abstract ideas don't exist out there, they exist in here. And if all sentient creatures on Earth died, there would be no such thing as a hero or a chair, the conceptual idea of a chair. There might be the matter that makes up that chair, but chair and chairness, hero, morality, any abstract idea will cease to exist with the death of all sentient creatures. What this means is we construct abstract ideas in our minds, and when we agree on those constructions, we write dictionaries. When we agree what words mean, we write dictionaries and laws and encyclopedias. This codifies these ideas, but they are still constructed and agreed upon by consensus. That's really important. So we agree on what an adult is in the UK for certain things at certain times. So you can vote at the age of 18 in the UK. You can have consensual sex, though, at the age of 16. That used to be illegal for homosexuals until much more recently, when that was changed to be the age of 16. You can do certain. You can drive at 17. So again, okay, all these different laws, all these different ages. But then when do you become an adult? Well, we've decided adult is 18, and that's to do with sort of voting and legality and responsibility and all these things. But these are constructions, and we can see that because in America, drinking might be 21 in this state, 18 in that state, whatever. You might be able to have sex here at this age, but there at that age. You go to a different country, you can vote at this age, but in another country, it's a different age. These things change around the world, and there is nothing set in. So there's nothing out there There's no abstract kind of prescriptive law or definition of a voting age human or an adult. So we construct these ideas. Let me bring you on to a piece that really looks at this. And I'm not going to delve into this with massive detail, but it is if you want to check it out, go to Only Sky and look up What is Personhood, setting the scene. This is where I set out the idea of looking at the idea of personhood, because what we're going to talk about in a minute is, does a blastocyst, a group of cells, have personhood? And is it equivalent to an adult human being? So that if we were to destroy a group of cells in a petri dish, that would be murder, in the same way that shooting or destroying an adult human being is murder. I would say clearly not. These are two incredibly different entities, and there is no equivalence there. But for the pro-lifers, who I actually call anti-choicers, because they're only pro-life up until birth, they're pro-birthers. After that, it's just, don't really care. Not really interested in the welfare state, so, whatever. So, I would say that these are not equivalent, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But let's get on to the idea of conceptual nominalism and how it applies to this context. I'm also going to talk about the Sororities Paradox, my favorite thought experiment in philosophy, because it's so important for anything that exists on a continuum, particularly. So the Sororities Paradox, just very briefly, is this paradox, and it's a paradox because, as I will show you, you have a sand dune, right? You take one grain of sand off that sand dune. Is it still a sand dune? Well, you look at it and yeah, there's no discernible difference. You take another grain of sand and then notice it's sand dune. You keep doing that, and at no single point do you go, well, that was a sand dune, but you took one grain of sand off and it's now not a sand dune, right? There's no discernible point. There's no absolute point where that goes from being a sand dune to not being a sand dune. And the problem is you then get down to 0 grains of sand, and you've still got a sand dune because you've been unable to decide at that exact point that it turns into not a sand dune. And that's a paradox. And so what this really shows is that we arbitrarily categorize things because it's easy for us to then make rules and laws and understand and categorize the world. But those categorizations are abstract and come from here, and we construct them. They are not discovered from out there. And that's hugely important. So that's the Sororities Paradox, and it applies to so many things. And let me just show you how it applies in this context when we're talking about personhood. So again, we're going to be looking at what makes a human being. And I'm going to talk about those words a little bit after this. So I often start off, when I give this talk in public, I'll say, to the audience, what is a human? Oh, sorry, what is a hero? And everyone will give me a different example and a different definition of a hero. And I'll say that's because there is no such absolute thing as a hero that exists out there. And we construct our ideas of what a hero is. And then when we sort of agree on a word, we write a dictionary, as I've said. And so therefore, you're right. This is something that is very much subjective, but there's an element of defining a word that becomes by consensus. And another good example of this is my favorite little image here, which is at what point does that piece of text go from being red to being blue? And of course, there is no individual point. It's like the sand dune thing. There is no individual point. What we do is we invent a word to like red to cover this kind of color that looks like this, and blue, and then purple in the middle, and then violet, and then we invent. In the end, what you'll get down is to individual code on a I don't know, Photoshop, to show like each different sort of iteration of color. But realistically, there is at no point does that go from red to blue, because we invent red and we invent blue, and the distinction between the two becomes fuzzy. and that really shows that's what's also applied to evolution. Okay, so when we look at evolution, we can look at we can look at loads of the idea of anti-evolutionists is like, oh, dogs don't give birth to non-dogs. No, they don't. Absolutely, they don't. And evolutionists don't believe this. But Darwin knew there's a problem with species. It's called the species problem, which is to say that when we draw a line down here and we say this was Homo australopithecus, and then this was Homo, I don't know, heidelbergensis. I don't know if that's the one that comes after it, but whatever. But at no point does one give birth to the other. It's a gradual transition, right? This gradual transition goes from there to there, and we come along later and we draw a line down there. But if you find a skull from somewhere that from in between these two sort of species, then you'll have paleontologists argue that actually it belongs to this one, it belongs to this one. Of course, it's needed. We just have arbitrarily drawn a line down there anyway, and it's essentially one big evolved organism line. Okay, and we just chop it up at arbitrary points. But if you were to actually drill down to that point, that species doesn't give birth to that species. Okay, this is just a gradual transition through time. Okay, and that's how we apply that to species. But we also, hopefully you'll understand where I'm going with this, we also apply this to human development. So human development goes from, fertilized egg, blastocyst, embryo, baby, toddler, infant, I don't even know, where the difference is there, child, adolescent and teenager, adolescent, adult, middle-aged person, old age pensioner, dead body. Now, at what point do you go from one to the other is completely arbitrary. And actually, what we'll do is we'll draw arbitrary lines to help us in legal cases. But I can tell you, I have met some 17-year-olds who have a better political idea than some 30-year-olds. And yet that 17-year-old can't vote and the 30-year-old can and probably doesn't. So the idea is that we say, okay, 18 is at the point where you have enough knowledge about the world that you can vote. But there will be some 17-year-olds that are far more knowledgeable and mature than some 20-year-olds. But we have to draw a line somewhere, okay? And in fact, Scotland wants the voting age to be 16, and some countries have that. And, there are arguments for and against this. But on an individual point of view, there will be differences between that individual and that individual as far as their development goes. When you are 17 years old, 364 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds, right? Old. The next second you become 18. There's no discernible difference between you 1 second before and 1 second after, but you can vote this at this point and not at this point. But there's no discernible difference. You have no extra characteristics or abilities other than an arbitrary time, right? Which is based on the rotation of the Earth around the sun. Okay, so this is just humans cutting up time to allow us to make rules of thumb that will help us practically, but they have no objective truth out there. Okay, so when you look at that for human development, and then you ask yourself, what is personhood? Hopefully you see where this is going. Because then you say, right, before we even talk about, well, what is personhood? Because that is hugely problematic. Where does it develop? Well, for some people, it's going to develop in different ways to other people, and some people might not get it. And irrespective of what you say personhood is, do you have it when you're asleep, when you're unconscious, when you've got dementia, when you're a blastocyst, do you have personhood? When you're a baby? Actually, when you're 4 years old, do you even have personhood? Of course, there's different ideas of what personhood is. It could be anything to do with genetics, consciousness over time, your ability to consider the future and plan for the future, free will, being alive, being aware, self-aware, positive and negative sensations, the ability to feel pleasure and pain, emotions, the sense of self, controls over your behavior, recognizing other persons, other people, your intentional action, the language and verbal behavior, and so on. So Daniel Dennett, as a philosopher, has said that what he reckons personhood is made up of these 6 different sort of ideas. He says it's rationality, consciousness or intentionality, being taken to be a person, recognition of the assertion by another, capability of reciprocating, capability of verbal communication, and self-consciousness. Of course, you can talk about, well, do you have that when you're unconscious, when you're in a vegetative state, in a coma? Do you have that when you're a baby, when you're blastocyst? And this becomes a problem. So that Daniel Dennett says, I reckon personhood are these things. Loads of other philosophers would disagree. And then loads of other philosophers would agree. I'd say, okay, that's a good account of what personhood is, but it's still just something we're constructing and doesn't exist out there. The point being is when an egg is fertilized by sperm, well, it certainly doesn't have rationality, consciousness or intentionality. Being taken to be a person, pro-lifers will say that it's a person. Capability of reciprocating, capability of verbal communication and self-consciousness. So a fertilized egg under that definition would not have personhood. And if you're saying personhood is what gives the entity human beingness, and therefore if you were to destroy that, it would be murder because you're killing a human being intentionally. We've got a problem because I would say, well, that blastocyst did not have personhood. And I don't think there's any way you can argue it has personhood. So I think the personhood argument is hugely problematic, and personhood develops over time. And there's no one, we can't agree on what personhood is, but even when you do agree, you'll find that those characteristics are developed over time. There's probably no one point where a human being develops it, and humans will develop that in different ways. For example, rationality. I know many adults who are not rational because I argue with them a lot. And I know children that are more rational than that. I also know children who aren't rational. One of my sons. That's why I have so many arguments. No, but the point is that this is messy and it's fuzzy. And I think it's hugely problematic. So the personhood argument for me falls apart on many, many grounds. I'm going to do a video specifically on personhood, and I'll talk you through my presentation that I sometimes give. Because so the idea, if you're a pro-lifer or anti-choicer, if you're going to come and say, well, a blastocyst, an embryo, has personhood, then you're going to fail in that argument, because I'd say personhood doesn't exist ontically. It doesn't exist out there. It exists in here, and we have to agree on what that is in order for us to say that is personhood, for all of us to adhere to that declaration. And then for that to be meaningful, it needs to be codified into law. And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it goes on and on. So it's not as easy as what you're saying. So that's that. That's just the whole sort of personhood sort of talked about there. I just want to talk a little bit about, let me find it, because there's so much to talk about here. I'm not going to have time to cover everything. I want to talk about people who, by the way, welcome to everyone onto the chat. It's good to have all you guys here. Dustin Ellaby, morning bro, listening while at work. I tend to think the debate standpoint for the pro-life argument is that it's not necessarily about personhood, but about being a human in general, DNA, etc. Right, so we're going to come on to this. And so that you will get some pro-lifers give up on the personhood argument because actually it's too difficult. But a lot don't. There's a lot of people that have it riding on that. And then you get some Catholics who talk about the essence of a human. But again, if you're a conceptual nominalist where there is no such thing as an essence, it's like this is an abstract idea. Like, I'm not born with either a human essence or a man essence, or, you know, how far do you granularize that? How far do you take that down? I used to be ginger. Did I have the essence of a ginger man? Or so on and so forth. A heterosexual ginger white man. Do I have all of those essences? Those are just sort of properties. We're going to come on to talk about potential in a little bit. That's a huge one. Essentialism, this is called, I think is utter nonsense, but primarily because I'm a conceptual nominalist, and I can't make sense of it. You have to believe in some kind of Platonic realism, some kind of realm where these ideas and essential and perfect forms exist that we are somehow reflecting. And when we're not perfectly reflecting that form, we're a bad version of that. So if I'm a homosexual male, I'm actually not adhering to what the perfect form of male is, which is heterosexual male, or whatever natural law theorists might say. And this is why they have the arguments of sexual perversion as used technically in natural law theory, and I've written heaps on this, but it doesn't stand up to conceptual normalism, which I think is clearly and obviously what is evidence in the world around us, and works philosophically much better as well. So you might say that I've argued with people say, this is an innocent human being. When you are aborting a blastocyst or something, you're saying you are murdering an innocent human being. It's like it's a bunch of cells in this case, right? So innocent can no more be coherently applied to a bunch of cells than it can to a rock. A group of cells, irrespective of what it is, has no consciousness, volition, intention, so it can in no meaningful way be described as being innocent. But you've got to watch your language when you're arguing with anti-choicers, pro-lifers. You have to call them out on language, because they will try and smuggle in things like a blastocyst being a baby, being a human being, being a human, and this is what I'm going to come on to just next. All of these things are really problematic, and it's sloppy, but it's stuff that we use casually. We might say that in casual conversation, but actually we're not being accurate. And it's that accuracy that allows them to make arguments that might seem sensible when you first hear them, but actually they are really problematic because they're not being accurate enough with the way they use words. So you can't have a rock can't be guilty and it can't be innocent. Something that's not done anything isn't innocent. Like a rock can't be innocent. If something has intention and volition and does something innocently and has never committed a crime, and it has the ability to commit crimes but hasn't, then you might say it's innocent, right? But you can't say a blastocyst is innocent. In the same way that I can say a chicken egg is a fertilized chicken egg is innocent. Yeah, or even whatever. You can't do it. It's so innocent. Don't let them get away with saying it's innocent. But the human bit is interesting. So I've argued with people who have said, they've smashed together. There are three terms here. There's human, a human, and human being, right? And they are all different here. So I would say my opinion is that a human is a noun, but human is an adjective. So I'm going to read a bit of what I've written before in arguing against someone who said. So I was arguing against someone who said, I agree that the word human, when prefaced with the letter A, means a human being. So he was already saying a human is the same as a human being. And I'm saying, well, actually, I disagree with that. But also, a human is not human being or a human. So the issue here is that the use of the indefinite article a before human means human is now a noun. So when you say, that person is human, that's an adjective. It's describing that person. But if you're saying that person is a human, you're now saying that person is equivalent to a noun, right? So you're changing it from an adjective to a noun. And that's actually quite important. is now a noun rather than an adjective and implies a singular instantiation. So really, a human should utterly suffice for doing what the person I'm arguing against needs it to do, being an instantiation of Homo sapiens. So his use of human being is thus superfluous language, with the being bit being redundant. For people interested in accuracy of language for philosophical and debate purposes, we have human as an adjective denoting of the Homo sapiens species. A human denoting an instantiation of that species, so like a single organism of that human species. And human being as something subtly different, implying personhood or specific human characteristics. Moreover, a blastocyst would be none of these still. A blastocyst is a developmental stage of a human or of a Homo sapiens organism. It is a nested subset of the reference set human, but I would contest it can be given the label a human. You could say a human blastocyst, but you can't say a blastocyst is a human. So what we have there is, you know, if I said to you, go and cuddle a human, right? If you walked up and cuddled a Petri dish, like with a group of cells in that were smaller than your eye could see, would you be cuddling a human? No, there's no understanding. A human is different from a group of cells, and I think that's hugely important. I just want to react to a few comments here. We're going to come on to potential in a second. An adult is a group of cells too, not an argument. So okay. So you would agree, I presume, that an adult is different from a child. So there's some kind of difference, like if you were to have sex with an adult and sex with a child, there'll be something different going on with those two instantiations of a human. So we have a developmental journey going on with the organism. We draw the line for sex in the UK at 16, right? Other countries do it differently, but that thing doesn't exist out there. This is just what we agree on, and we just agree that at that point in time, that human organism is substantially developed enough sexually and mentally to be able to give consent and to understand what sex is, right? And we do that at 16. Other countries may do that differently. So this is an argument because you are able to differentiate the legal status and the developmental status and the labeling status of a human being at different stages. So here's a thought experiment that I think might be prevalent to this discussion. So where can I find it? Here it is. Right. So, and I don't know if Crackshot 322 here is a pro-lifer. What's the difference between an animal and a human? Well, a human is a type of animal. So, you know, again, a human and an animal are human constructs as labels that we create and apply to certain things with certain characteristics. But actually, you could disagree. You'd be well within your rights to disagree both what a human and both what an animal is. And you can say, actually, is a bacteria an animal? Is a virus an animal? Is a fungus an animal, or is it a plant? Or what's the difference between a plant? And when what about hermaphrodites? What about asexually reproducing organisms, and so on? We create a whole empire of labeling, and we do that so that we can navigate the world and make sense of the world. But it doesn't mean that those labels are objectively true. It means they're practical and pragmatic and useful for us to navigate the world. So a human is an animal, but not so. Classic logic. Bit of logic here, which is, all humans are animals, but not all animals are human. So it's different. We're talking about nested subsets here, but of course, is a completely different thing. Well, not a completely different thing. We are an animal, but not all animals are humans. And then it goes on to say it's evolution. Actually, the fetus or clump of cells goes through the process of evolution in the womb. Yes, it does. Exactly. So it goes through a process of evolution, but and at some stage, we say at birth, this becomes a human being. The question is, what is a human being? So there's this difference between a human, and I would say, so a blastocyst is not a human. I would say it's a human blastocyst. In the same way that if you had a fertilized chicken egg, right, and you fried it and you served it up, you would not say, I am eating a chicken. You would not say, I am eating, thanks for that, that was a lovely chicken. You would say, thanks for that, it was a lovely egg. Or at the most, you might say a lovely chicken egg. Right. So there's a discernible difference there. In the same way that if you said, oh, I really want to make a bench, and I say, okay, you can make a bench with this, and I give you an acorn. You said, no, I need an oak tree. Or I say, well, here's an oak tree, and I give you an acorn. You say, that's not an oak tree, that's an acorn. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you. You're actually right. It's not an oak tree. It is an acorn. It is the seed developmental stage of an oak tree, but it ain't an oak tree. Right. And that's really important, because therein lies the importance of language and the importance of understanding a developmental journey. That means that this thing is incredibly different from what it eventually might become. And it means that we can then apply different rules and ideas to it. Right, I have a rock, right? If I smash it down into the ground and break that rock, you'd be like, nah, okay. That rock could potentially be a statue, right? It could be a little statuette. If I took a statuette and threw it at the ground, you'd feel a little bit different. Someone's put a lot of time and effort into that. The rock is just a potential statue, but why would you have a difference of opinion about me breaking those two things? A brick and a house. I want to go through a thought experiment for you now. This is something written for me by Andy Schuler, who's an evolutionary psychologist who used to contribute to my blog. So he says, here are 3 moral dilemmas that should give you a headache if you're pro-life and value intellectual consistency. So, 1, you are in a burning fertility clinic and you can either save the 50-year-old janitor who lies unconscious on the floor, or you can save a box with 100 human embryos ready for implantation. These are blastocysts in a petri dish. You only have the time to save one. So a box of embryos or an adult human being. Do you or do you not choose the box and let the janitor die? Would it change your answer if I multiply the number of embryos in a box by 10 or by 100? You've got 1,000 embryos in a box and you've got 1 human adult there. Who would you save? I know who I'd save. I'd save the adult. Now, those are all potential humans, but they are not human beings. 2, similar to 1, but now you have to actively destroy the box with the human embryos yourself instead of just passively letting it burn in the fire. Imagine that you are carrying the unconscious janitor and the box with the embryos blocks your way. Flames are all around you and you only have one move forward by kicking the box to the side right into the fire. Would you kick the box into the fire to save the janitor, yes or no? And yourself. Would you think there's 1,000 human beings in there? There's 1,000 human beings in there. I can't let them die. And by kicking that box into the fire is murder of 1,000 human beings. I can't live with that on my conscience. So I'll just burn myself and the janitor. I'll take two down with me and maybe kick those, or whatever. Number 3, you're on your way out of the burning fertility clinic your only way out is through the parking garage. You have the keys for 2 of the cars that are parked there, an old company van that has a cooling box with a human embryo ready for implantation in it, and your brand new shiny $250,000 Porsche. You have no special connection to the embryo, i.e. this is not an embryo derived from an in vitro fertilization of one of your wife's eggs, and 2 of you have been trying for years to have children without success or something like that. It's just one of many embryos derived from IVF or some egg and sperm donors you don't know. The company van is further away from your Porsche, and getting to it poses a very small but non-negligible risk of dying, let's say about 1 in 10,000 chance. Which car do you pick, knowing that the other one will be destroyed by the fire? Again, are you really and genuinely giving an equivalence, equivalence, an equal value of 1 or 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 blastocysts, just groups of cells, to a human being, an actual fully grown human being or child or whatever? And I think that's a really interesting way of being able to say, okay, there is definitely a different kind of value going on here. Potential is a problem because, an acorn is potentially an oak tree, but I can go and I can crush an acorn, but I'd be done by the council. I might be arrested for chopping down oak trees because they have tree protection orders. I can't, chop. If I chop down 1,000 oak trees in Hampshire where I live, or if I gathered up 1,000 acorns and just put the acorns in the bin, there's a massive difference, right? If I had 1,000 fertilized chicken eggs or 1,000 grown chickens, and I hit the chicken eggs with a hammer, I'd feel somewhat different from hitting the actual chickens with a hammer and killing them. Because there is a difference. Acorns are not oak trees. Blastocysts are not human beings. They are developmental stages of a human organism. And that's really all you need to know about, as far as I'm concerned, about the abortion debate, pro-life, pro-choice debate. They don't have personhood. There's absolutely no way you're gonna win the personhood argument, because it's a construction anyway, and there's no way that a blastocyst has any of the characteristics of personhood. The only thing you can argue is it potentially might have personhood, and even then you don't know whether it would develop, or that you might develop with fundamental special needs that invalidate it from being a person because of not having those characteristics. And that's a problem with nailing down these ideas of personhood. So I think the personhood argument is hugely problematic. So then it's just coming to, well, it's just a human being, has the essence of a human being. Well, no, because I disagree with that. But there is just an obvious difference between a blastocyst and a fully grown human being, or even a baby, in terms of all sorts of characteristics. And what the law has to do is to draw that arbitrary line, and it draws the arbitrary line of human life at birth, right? Whenever that birth is for the life of the fetus. But that's a tricky thing to do, and it's essentially you have to draw a line somewhere, because that's what we do with all these things on a continuum. We draw a line somewhere: adulthood, childhood, human lifehood, Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo heidelbergensis. We draw a line down there. It's fuzzy either side of that line, but we just draw a line down there. Right, that's how we can navigate the world, and that's practically and pragmatically useful for us in order to create a social for us to be social and to do the things we want to do and understand the world in the way that we need to understand it, so that we can function properly. So we categorize and we do these things and we draw these lines. So there you go. And I've had many of these debates with other people on all these different subjects, all these these different arguments. Please check them out. I argued with a chap called Daniel Wilcox? Clinton Wilcox from the Life Training Institute, which is a pro-life organization. I had a massive protracted argument with him online. And we swapped articles and whatnot, and so some of this is included in that. I mean, he stated a chicken is not an egg, but the egg is a different substance than the chicken. But the chicken embryo inside the chicken egg is absolutely a chicken, and it is the same adult chicken it will eventually grow into. So this is the huge. So this is the problem, right? So I'll just repeat that, because he has to say this. He has to say this for his argument to work in terms of a human blastocyst, that killing that is somehow murder, right? So he has to bite the bullet, and he bites the bullet, but it's just ridiculous. So he says, but the chicken embryo inside the chicken egg is absolutely a chicken, and it is the same adult chicken it will eventually grow into. There's absolutely no way I can agree with that. An acorn is not a mature oak tree, but it is an oak. See, this is the slimy use of words. So he no longer says, so recognize what he does here. In fact, I might have this to share with you. I'm going to share it with you here, because this is all good fun. So as you can see here, I say language is important. Okay. So down here, this is what he says. He says, a chicken is not an egg because the egg is a different substance than the chicken, but the chicken embryo inside the chicken egg is absolutely a chicken, and it is the same adult chicken it will eventually grow into. An acorn is not a mature oak tree. Notice how he uses the word tree there. But it is an oak at a very early stage of its development. So already he's dropped tree. So there's some equivocation going on here. So he's dropped the word tree and he's saying it's oak. Well, basically what he means by oak, well, I think I'll come on to, I'll talk about that in a second. Very early stage of its development. The acorn will develop into a mature oak tree, but it is the same oak at every point in its life. In the same fashion, the embryo or blastocyst, as he seems to want to fixate on, that's me, will develop into a mature human being because it is an immature human being. There's huge amounts of problems here. Not only he's talking about the chicken egg is absolutely a chicken, and it is the same adult chicken it will eventually grow into. And before I continue, I will continue on that. But this is the massive problem that he thinks is solved, called personal identity over time. So in philosophy, this is not solved. We don't know how a human being maintains its personal identity over time. So Jonathan M.S. Pitt, and this is famously, exemplified in the thought experiment of Ship of Theseus. If you're British, you might have seen Only Fools and Horses triggers broom. So Ship of Theseus is, you have a ship. If you replace every single plank of wood, every nail and every bit of sail and every rope on that ship over time, so that there's not one single molecule of that ship that is of the original Ship of Theseus, is it still the Ship of Theseus? What is it that allows that to still be called the Ship of Theseus? So if I've changed every single cell in my body and every bit of, and actually my genetics might have even changed over time with the corruption of my genetic code, and my epigenetics and all sorts, and my memories have changed. What is it that means that I'm the same Jonathan M.S. Pierce that I was 5 minutes ago, 5 hours ago, 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, 10 months, 10 years, when I was a blastocyst, when I was a fertilized egg? And no philosopher's really answered this. It's a really difficult question. It's really interesting. It's an absolutely fascinating debate. I absolutely love this debate. But actually, I believe in individual instantiations of an individual over time. So each new moment, I'm basically a different instantiation of my former self. So I'm at like Jonathan M.S. Pierce, 28,635,000.6 or whatever. So it's the continuous I, but that doesn't work pragmatically. So because I can't go to my mortgage advisor and say, or the bank and say, by the way, I'm not paying my mortgage anymore. The person I was when I signed it, because they'll just they'll take my house away from me. So yeah, that won't work. But the idea is, this is a huge philosophical problem. And because these problems are insoluble, we can't solve them. We generate practical ways to get around the issues, which is you are Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and that's what you're known legally as, and there you go. Until you die, that's who you are. Get over it. And then I start sort of wondering, what is Jonathan M.S. Pearce? Do I have a better idea of who I am than maybe my partner has? Maybe my partner's more accurately knows who I am than I do. Who gets to decide what is Jonathan M.S. Pearce? Is it my genetic code? But that's changing. What if you took part of my genetic code when I was younger and made a new version of me that then grew up and it had a better version of my genetic code than I do myself? Am I not, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You can think of so many different thought experiments here. But Crackshot 322 smash, enough eggs and the species goes extinct. Happened in New Zealand. Evolution. I'm not sure the point of that. The potential wasn't met. Again, not quite sure. The potential argument. Potential is not actuality. You know, a lump of clay is potentially a statue, right? But it's not a statue, and I can punch that lump of clay and be happy with punching that. But if I punch a statue and break it, I'm less happy than that. So there is just fundamental difference between something that is potentially something else. The potential is not the other thing. So then when we go back to this chicken and the egg scenario, acorn and oak tree scenario, we have a big difference here. And I'll just really quickly read this next bit out that I wrote. Here, Wilcox is referring back to his fast and loose use of language we saw in the previous post. He is careful enough to say an acorn is an oak, but not an oak tree. By doing this cunning little switch, he is really just saying the acorn is of the oak species, but is not an oak tree. Well, said like this agrees with my conclusions from the previous post. A human embryo is of the Homo sapiens species, but is not a human or oak tree. So actually, that kind of approach that he's using is you know, if you unpick it, it aligns with mine. To continue, a car chassis on a car factory assembly line will develop into a car with the correct external inputs, but is not yet a car. It is not the same car because it is not yet a car. It is not a car, and it is a car in its developmental stages. Same for acorn, chicken egg, chicken embryo, and chicken blastocyst. Wilcox, the guy I was arguing against, doesn't do any work to establish why it is meaningfully a different substance and what this actually means. Acorn blastocyst zygote, carries the same DNA and the required materials to build the next stage given external inputs, and is at a given stage where, as long as it gets those right external inputs, and the same can be said for human zygotes or cars, it will develop into a particular adult human or car. This is because of the DNA or the car plans or the assembly line programming and given environmental influence. There is no substantial difference between acorn and germinating seed, seedling and tree, or with egg to adult chicken, in the way that Wilcox wants. All of these stages are not the final product until they are the final product. But before then, they are developmental stages that require given inputs. At each of these stages, if the entity doesn't get the external inputs, it will not continue to develop, whether car, human embryo, or chicken zygote. But arguing a human embryo is the same substance as an adult human is bizarre, and I don't think it can work on any level. It is missing some substances an adult will have whilst having some others. What are the essential substances that count? You might actually argue that a chicken egg is actually more self-organizational or independent than a human embryo, since it is not connected by a mammalian placenta and requires fewer inputs, but it will still need warmth and appropriate conditions. A human embryo is far more dependent on nutrients and substances that come in through the umbilical cord that a seed or a chicken zygote will not need. In other words, one can argue against Wilcox's position that a chicken egg developing is less of a substantial change, but that a human embryo is more parasitic on its mother in utero. Therefore, despite his protestations, Wilcox does not establish that this is in any meaningful way a disanalogy. And there's loads more things I go on to talk about, and that argument took about 6 different posts worth of arguing. But hopefully, you get the idea here that it is really difficult. Well, it's impossible for me, in my opinion. It is impossible for the anti-choice movement to argue that abortion is murder. You just can't. It's just it's not the same. And I think the thought experiments in the burning fertility clinic will show you that there's definitely a value difference between a box of embryos and a fully fledged human being. So there you go. So that's the main kind of nugget of what I wanted to talk to you about today. But there is plenty more to say on that. There's plenty more to say on the use of language. There's plenty more to say on the Sororities Paradox and how we can apply that. There's plenty more to say on personhood. And I just think that this argument is going to be doing the rounds an awful lot at the moment. But I think one of the most powerful is a good use of, well, conceptual normalism, as I said at the beginning, and a good use of the acorn and oak tree analogy there. Does anyone have any questions in the side? Let's just go through a few of the ones that have been there already. Shireen says, maybe it's important to add the misogyny that finds women's autonomy problematic. There are, of course, a huge amount of other arguments to be had around this that I don't remotely have the time to deal with today, because each of them are huge, and the one about bodily autonomy. So, I mean, here I'm trying to establish a building blocks that a blastocyst is not a human being. Okay, it's not an adult human. It is an entity of the human species in its early developmental stages. That's what it is. And it is fully dependent upon the mother, but it has nothing that would indicate personhood. And I don't see any problem with terminating that group of cells. Okay. And I think it's absolutely the choice of the mother, because it's her body, in combination with healthcare professionals, but also taking into account the father, if indeed, if that's how it's all set up, because actually that there are, this is a genetic conjunction of two people. And so, I think it's not just the mother's decision, but it is predominantly the mother's decision in a very large and meaningful way. But I just say, don't ignore the father if his wishes are, part of the equation. But ultimately, it's the woman's choice, and that's that. For me, done and dusted. Yes, there are other people who will add to the discussion, but it is a woman's choice. It's her body, and there you go. Dustin, what about the intent of the action at hand, like smashing eggs with no purpose versus eating eggs for survival, cutting trees with no... Again, when we're talking, this is morality. Okay, we go back to the whole conceptual normalism. Morality is a construct itself. And so agreeing on morality is always going to be difficult. But there will be some versions of morality that it's a classic of, like, stealing a loaf of bread is bad, but if it's to feed my children who are starving and they will die if they don't eat that loaf of bread, then stealing that loaf of bread is in some moral frameworks good. Not if you're Immanuel Kant, who believed in categorical imperatives, which is saying it's always wrong to lie and it's always wrong to steal. So he would say, so if I was hiding two children in my attic, like not for dodgy reasons, but to save them, because I know there's a child murderer around, and then the child murderer comes around and says, "Oh, do you know where Jack and Jill are?" Right, I know they're in my attic, but if I know that by telling him he's going to murder them, then surely it's right for me to lie and say, "No, I don't know where they are. I think they might have gone down there." And then he goes off, and I've saved those two children's lives. So Immanuel Kant would say, well, it's wrong to lie. It's a categorical imperative, and so therefore, really, you should, if you want to be moral in that position, you've got to say they're up in the attic, and then lo and behold, you've aided the killing of two children. So morality depends what I'm trying to say is, depends what your moral framework is. Here, smashing the eggs with no purpose versus eating the eggs for survival. Well, I mean, smashing the eggs is wasteful and I'd say just for no reason is wasteful, and therefore does have a moral dimension to it. But if you're eating the eggs for survival, yeah, I've certainly got no problems with that particularly. I mean, I'm a vegan, but essentially, cutting trees with no purpose versus purpose. Yes, yeah. So there is definitely a difference, and then even more of a difference if you're then going to make that sustainable. So you're then planting the trees again to replenish that which you've taken. So yeah, we can make moral decisions, or we can make actions. Actions are incredibly morally complex depending on how deep you want to be thinking about things, and both the intent of the person and the impact of what they're doing and how much they know of the impact. So if you knock down a tree but you had no concept of what a tree was and what the issue it would cause and blah blah blah, that's very different to if you did have that knowledge. So knowledge is hugely important. It's like I've talked before about child sacrifice of the Aztecs. Okay, so say the Aztec or the human sacrifice. Sorry. So if they think, right, the sun will not rise if we don't sacrifice these people. So therefore, we're all going to die if we don't sacrifice these people, and we're not going to have crops. So for them, it's actually morally right to sacrifice those people. They just had the wrong knowledge. They didn't have the correct knowledge to make the optimal moral decision, which would be don't sacrifice those people. It makes no difference. But if you genuinely thought that, then in their paradigm, that is the morally right thing to do. Let Something Shine says anti-abortion rallies are occurring in Washington, D.C. right now. They are small, but they are big state oppressive. It's going to get messy. America is going to get messy. Anti-abortion rallies are occurring. So again, they are small, but they are oppressive from the hypocritical big state for my ideas only crowd. Right. There's an interesting idea here. I just want to do a little bit of politics, which is the tension between, say, the left and right. Left and right is a bit problematic. And I said this on my interview with Eddie Tabash the other day. But when the right is small government, so you get the right wing often being, libertarian small government. They say, right, we don't want the government to interfere in your life. It's all about liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty, 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 libertarianism. Yeah, but you must be Christian. You can't have an abortion. You can't sleep with someone of the same sex. It's like, hang on, you just said it was all about individual liberty and autonomy, and that you're telling me I can't believe what I want to believe, I can't do what I want with my own body, and I have to sleep with who you say I have to sleep with? What's this small government thing you're talking about? Because quite frankly, your small government is coming into my house and telling me what to do in my own home. So you can jog on. Whereas the left wing, or big government, and you should do this, and it should be like this, and we'll have this welfare and this and that. But you know what? You can do what you like in your house and shag who you like and believe what you like. And that kind of liberalism, socialism, libertarianism, but interfering with your personal life. There's this weird tension that goes on with the classic left-right in the social domain, in your social moral domain, sexual social moral domain. So there you go. Daniel says, this is still something I'm taking a lot of thought over. Thanks for sharing your views. Thank you. And thanks for listening. I hope this is in some way useful. I'm only reading these so I don't know if these are relevant enough for me to go through, but yes, potential is met via actions and vigilance, thoughts of a future where they or it exists. Abortion is too nihilistic for me. Do you know what? In a perfect world, you wouldn't get abortions and you'd have children and all children would be perfectly well looked after. And you would want every child and therefore you wouldn't have to go through abortions. I think all other things remaining equal, abortions are, I don't know. I don't know if they're negative at all. But they aren't, even if they are negligibly, because they're just a group of cells. I actually think they're probably morally neutral, abortions. But even if you thought they're marginally negative, they would get trumped by the desires of the mother. is my opinion. So I don't think it's nihilistic. I think it's only nihilistic if you attach value to blastocysts that, in my opinion, don't warrant that value attached to them. So yeah, no, that's Noche Patada. I guess these unborn babies deserve healthcare and should be counted on the census. So yeah, I don't know what position you're coming from here, but it's interesting how when you see pro-life people, they're pro-birth, and as soon as a baby's born, they don't really care about it. But you know, if you're truly pro-life, great, let's get better welfare, let's get better healthcare system, a universal healthcare system that everyone can tap into the best healthcare possible. It would be absolutely brilliant. In fact, in America, you have a you don't have a universal healthcare system. You have it's ridiculous. You have health insurance and big pharma and all these sort of corporate entities getting involved in healthcare provision, and you still spend way more per capita of tax money on healthcare than we do in the UK or in Canada. Like, you're spending per capita on healthcare, even though you've got this like wonderful free market system, is still high. Go and look at the stats. Go and look at the healthcare spend per capita of taxpayers' money. It's ridiculous. So you just got, if you've got loads of money, you've got a wonderful healthcare system. Well done. You can get some of the best healthcare in the world. But you've got an awful lot of millions of people who are both uninsured and underinsured, and it's an absolute crime. So I'm a massive advocate of universal healthcare. I've got multiple sclerosis, and thank goodness for the NHS. I did have to go to Moscow, get a load of money to get a treatment that at the time was not available on the NHS. It's now available at my hospital down the road, which is fantastic. I don't know whether I qualify for it yet, but time it will come. Absolute massive advocate of the NHS and universal healthcare. I don't know where a lot of these comments are going. Even a legal immigrant has got a pregnant, the child in the womb is an American citizen. It's not a citizen yet. I presume it would only be a citizen when it's born. I don't know the ins and outs about that. So I can't help you on that. Punching pregnant woman is now attempted murder of the unborn. That's do you know what? I've never thought about this. That would be, to me, just a really, really, I mean, it's a horrible thing to think about. But it's a really interesting thought experiment. And we do talk about pregnant women having that extra, value's the wrong word, extra something, isn't it? So if something happens to a pregnant woman, you have that extra sympathy. But actually what happens is, what you'll probably find is that sympathy or that value or whatever it is probably goes up the closer to term that pregnant woman is. So if that pregnant woman is just about to give birth to a viable fetus that is full term, then that is essentially almost a human being. And so therefore you know it's much closer, which is why what happens with abortion is they cut off at, say, in the UK it's 24 weeks, which is to say, you know, this is at a stage where after that it's you know much more viable or has X and Y characteristics, but before that, you know, less so. And so this is the point that we're going to do that, and we're going to allow abortion. And even then, it's something like in the UK at that stage, it's something like 0.5% of abortions are at that stage. So it's absolutely tiny. So people, when the classic pro-life thing is put up pictures of embryos, of fetuses that are much larger, more developed than fetuses or embryos that will be aborted. And it's to say, this is a human being, it's a baby, don't, you know, would you murder this? And they're like talking, smashing up loads of words, equivocating on the terms they're using, and then giving pictures of things that not all the time, but that wouldn't be aborted anyway. And or if that ever happens, it's in particularly life-threatening situations, which are very particular and happen exceptionally rarely. I was listening to someone today who was a nurse in this, saying that just, you know, and a doctor on the radio talking about like the percentage chance of it happening to a baby at that stage is incredibly unlikely, or a fetus. Ryan Coltastic says, good morning. This freaking country is making me so angry. The last few days, SCOTUS, so the Supreme Court, senators, vote for the right senators, guys. Vote for the right senators. Vote for the right president. Get the Supreme Court changed. Job done. So I've just done a little sort of walk through some of the arguments. I'm not pro-abortion or anti-abortion. However, I'm pro-responsibility. Absolutely. So that is a really good point. I think sometimes when you say a pro-choice is a much nicer term. It's not like you're pro-abortion. Like I was saying earlier, I'm not sure how much value I attach to, like, moral value either way to abortion. But it's not like I want abortions. It's not like I'm arguing for abortions. You can be an anti-natalist and say, actually, children are a bad idea because there's overcrowding, blah, blah, blah. That's slightly different tack to take. But I'm not pro-abortion, but I am pro-choice. And I think, the woman has full autonomy over, or should have full autonomy over her body. And the mess that's going to be taking place in the States, with certain states being able to offer it and certain states, as soon as that, the trigger rules that are coming in, the trigger laws that will happen as soon as that SCOTUS ruling takes place, those laws in something like 20 states will happen straight away, that abortion will be illegal straight away. That's a real worry. And I think, oddly as well, here's another political point I will make. Oddly, this might favor Democrats hugely. This might be a blessing in disguise for Democrats. And I might write a piece on this. Now, the reason is because fighting the midterms is always tough. The incumbent government always generally lose. They're trying to fight for a status quo. Democrats have got something to fight for now. Every senator, every congressperson will be about Roe versus Wade. It will be about reproductive rights. And you will get a mobilization of a huge amount of particularly female votes will come out. But you now have, a bit like sort of the Trump, don't vote Trump in, that mobilization of everyone not to get Trump in. You'll get a bit of that if Trump's coming back on the ticket. But for the midterms, you're in 2022 this year, November, you'll get a bunch of candidates whose campaigns will now be all about reproductive rights. So oddly enough, this might be a blessing in disguise for Democrats to maybe even win the midterms, for want of a better term. Don't know that will happen, but they were arguably looking at taking a beating, and now they might not, because of this, because there's going to be an awful lot of people getting up in arms about this. So there you go. Crackshot has a question. Can artificial wombs be the solution to this problem? Female donate their eggs at a young age, any will be created via artificial womb, no need for abortions. It's an interesting idea. You would then start, it'll be interesting, because then mothers will then go and see what then becomes a human being growing up through all the developmental stages, and go, actually, there'll just be all sorts of, I don't know, mental health issues and legal claims, and it's an interesting thought experiment. But in pragmatic terms, it's probably a right nightmare. But certainly interesting. Yeah. I mean, it comes down to really the whole debate is this group of cells a human being? What is a human being? Are these a human being? Now, interestingly, if you want to bring religion into it, it turns out that rabbinic law and Jewish law, I think at the time, was pretty much on the side that when it was born, it was a human being, not at conception. That's a much later idea. And I think the Bible defends that as well. I remember writing a piece on that maybe 10, 15 years ago. I'm pretty sure, actually, because you'd see a lot more pro-lifers quoting the Bible if it did support life starts at conception, but actually I don't think it does. And I think, as I say, rabbinic law and writing supports the life starts at birth. So there you go. I think it's just, whatever way you look at it, this is why it's favored by sort of Catholics, because they favor natural law, and natural law favors kind of an understanding of Platonic realism, so that something that comes together, like as soon as an egg is fertilized, somehow magically it has the essence of a human being. And the essence of a human being essentially is just a bit like philosophical magic. And it's fraught with problems. It's massively fraught with problems. And maybe I should do a talk on that, because that is what's underwriting quite a few of the Supreme Court justices' legal thinking, natural law theory. But again, without a foundation of Platonic realism, which is the idea that these things exist out there outside of our minds in some kind of Platonic reality, doesn't stand up. So natural law depends on Platonic realism to say that your essence is out there, and you are reflecting your essence, and the better you are at being a man or a human, the better you are reflecting that Plato's perfect forms. We're looking at the back of the cave, at shadows on the back of the cave in the firelight, right? And that's living is trying to living as a moral creature, is trying to match your living with the perfect form of what you should be. Probably bastardize that a bit, but that's just fundamentally a flawed ontological understanding of reality. And so, but that's natural law, and then that becomes what a Supreme Court justice thinks, and then they change the law in America. So literally, a bunch of Supreme Court justices will be, Amy Coney Barrett, for example, will be using, and I don't know, Brett Kavanaugh as well, will be using natural law to underwrite their legal thinking, and it's just utterly wrong. And so that's why it's really important that we do the philosophy. That there's a book that I edited. I'm just going to get it. Bear with me. These are only this is only for people really interested in quite deep philosophy. This is The Unnecessary Science by Gunter Laird, with a foreword by Bradley Bowen. This is about a critical analysis of natural law theory, taking on the Catholic thinking of Ed Feser and Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle as well, and looking at things like sexual ethics and all sorts, and you're poking holes in it. Really good book. But those are the sort of texts that and they're deep and dense and particular, specific and intricate, that the depth you have to go to really undo these frameworks that natural law theorists build up, from which they can launch their sort of legal battles to undo legal precedents. But it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. Anyway, there you go. If there are any more questions or anything, just as a point of housekeeping, thank you for super chats and super stickers in previous videos and all throughout my YouTube channel life and whatnot. There's a new thing that's on here called thanks. So on non-live videos, you can now do thanks, which is a way of supporting a channel. So any of those thanks going forward would be hugely appreciated. I do appreciate all the support, and I do appreciate all the chats that are going on the side here. I've been unable to join in completely. So what's also interesting, and again, this is a slightly political point. I remember when Clinton was up against Trump, and there was an article, I think it's by a Catholic actually. There was an article saying, I'm going to vote for Clinton because I'm really big on pro-life. But it turns out that all the welfare policies that Clinton was looking at putting in place, if you look at all the data, would reduce abortions, right? That literally, so the less welfare you have in place, the more you're going to rely on abortions, because you can't afford to bring up this child or look after this child in a particular way. So therefore, I'm not in a place to have this child. So therefore, I'm going to get an abortion because the welfare state has been stripped away. Whereas Clinton was like, I'm going to have this supportive welfare network and state in place, and that itself brings down abortion levels by much greater value than enforcing abortion clinics to close by making it illegal to have abortions. And I thought that's a really interesting way of looking at it, and it was actually using data as well. It was an evidence-based article and position, which is something I really liked. So yeah, these things are complex. It's going to be messy over the next couple of months, but hopefully today I've done a little bit of philosophy to show that some of these arguments that you might come across just don't hold up. Hopefully this has been useful to you, and if you disagree, obviously put it down in the comments after the video, and have it out in the comments. But I will be talking about this in further videos going forward, because this will be an ongoing debate, and there's much more to be said on different areas, particularly in natural law, as I said. As ever, guys, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for the chat that's going on over there. Probably pointing the wrong way. I don't know. Really appreciate that. Thank you for all your support over the months. And it's been a pleasure, as ever. Question everything, particularly yourselves. Toodle pips.